guys. We are hiking to the Loch via the Glacier Gorge trailhead. It's about 5 in the morning. We're the only ones out here. No one else in the parking lot. Yeah, this was packed down yesterday, but the snow, the wind is just blowing over the whole trail. So it's good to bring snowshoes even if you don't think you need them. There's no moon out tonight. It's just me and the stars and the wind and the critters. It's gonna be super windy at the Loch, but without that wind, we don't get that exposed ice. So, not very many complaints from this guy. So it got really windy while I was up there, so I'm going to do a little bit of narrative speaking here. So what I was doing here on the ice is looking for compositions. Some good foreground, we have our background, we kind of have our framing with the hills. So I'm looking for some features in the ice. So I'm approaching these big rocks. In my opinion, I think they're a little bit too big for a foreground. I'm looking for something a little smaller that I can get kind of on top of with my camera. But nonetheless, gotta check it out. You never know until you go. Sometimes these snow drifts can be a pretty good nice foreground if they're interesting little patterns or a nice little leading line, but my priority when I go and shoot in the winter like this in an icy lake are really awesome cracks or some methane bubbles. There are a little bit in the ice, not enough in my opinion to make a foreground, but I still gave a thumbs up because those are always good to look for. This small rock has a ton of really cool breaking features in the ice around it, plus it's not too big, and it kind of balances out the mountain in the background. There's a lot of cool snow patches, some really cool cracks in the ice leading to the mountain. One thing you want to do is take off the rubber stoppers on the bottom of your tripod if you have those spikes. So you want to get that tripod dug into the ice because the wind is strong on these winter lakes. I didn't want my camera blowing around. You're not going to get a good photo if your camera's moving on you, especially when it's kind of low light like this and you've got to shoot the longer exposure. So what I'm looking at is how am I going to compose this panorama? I'm going to shoot landscape-oriented photographs or images and then pan upwards towards the mountain. I really want to get on top of this ice feature here. Now when you do something like this kind of vertical panning panorama, you're inadvertently focus stacking as well. This is because as you pan upwards, your focal length is kind of moving along with the image. For this image, I chose an f-stop of 9. The reason being that for the lens I have on my camera at the time, this is the sharpest aperture in the range. Also, like I mentioned before, when you do a vertical panorama like this, you're kind of focus stacking anyway, so I don't need a super large depth of field, so I don't need to crank that aperture up. So 9 it is. I'm shooting at a 3-second exposure, and that's because I want to keep my ISO at 100 because I like my shots as clean as they can be. And if I have a tripod and not a lot of moving objects in my image that I don't want blurry, then it's okay to increase that shutter speed. Looking at the histogram, I have a small gap between the shadows of my left axis, making sure I'm not clipping any shadows. And you can also see I have a ton of room on my highlights, so I'm nowhere near clipping highlights. Because of this narrow histogram, I'm really only shooting one exposure. I don't need to do any bracketed shots. It's not a very huge dynamic range.